Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game. I'm Kevin Day. I'm a little stiff, and he is Liverpool He's Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire, chuckling at the fact I said I'm a little stiff. I knew you would. How are you, Kieran?
I'm very good. It's been a busy few days, shall we say?
Yes, of course it has, yeah. I should explain, by the way, to new listeners, I'm a little stiff because I walked a marathon yesterday, not because I'm excited at seeing Kieran, obviously. Yes, Kieran, I don't know why you've been busy. I mean, it is questions day, but we have one tiny little news issue that I think is probably worth mentioning. I don't know if anybody's interested in it, but I think they're still either drunk or hungover in Newcastle, aren't
they? Yes, they are. Yes, the deal that was been on and off non-stop for the past, well, probably for 13 out of the 14 years that Mike Ashley's been involved with the club. He's been thinking about selling the club, formally trying to sell it, informally trying to sell it. Well, as we know, the deal has now gone through. I think all fans of Newcastle should be toasting not only the new owners but our good friend Nick DeMarco as well, because I think it was his badgering and the way that he dealt with the Premier League, which encouraged them to drop the objections to PIF taking over the club. So the hurdles, which were first of all to do with piracy of broadcasting rights in Qatar, to which the Premier League had originally provided evidence. Well, those objections disappeared. Relations between the two countries, which were in a geopolitical dispute, to put it mildly, they seem to have evaporated. And I think the other issue was who is actually going to own Newcastle United. Yeah. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia isn't the legal owner, and they didn't want to have to go through the owners and directors test. PIF is the corporation that owns 80% of Newcastle United, and they have satisfied the test. So that's where we are at present.
Yeah, we should say again for new listeners that Nick DeMarco is a lawyer, not a random Tyneside heavy who's just going around badgering. It's, as you say, Kieran, it's not Saudi Arabia who owns the club. It's a Saudi Arabian company owned by many people in the Saudi Arabian government who own the club. So there's an element of sophistry here to a degree, isn't there? I mean, essentially, they've been taken over by the Saudi government, haven't they?
Indirectly, I think it is. There's no doubt about that. In terms of day-to-day decision making, I don't see that the Crown Prince will be involved in saying who's playing at left back this weekend. Those decisions will be delegated to the professionals. We have to raise the issue of Amnesty International and other people have expressed their unhappiness with the deal. But I think it's also indicative. Ultimately, football is all about money these days, and the Premier League is all about money. And as Joe Strummer sang in White Man in Hammersmith Palais, if Adolf Hitler flew in today, they'd send a limousine, because if he comes with a load of cash, that counts for far more than anything else.
And Newcastle fans are quite right to point out that there are many other clubs in the Premier League who can't occupy the moral high ground in terms of the background of their owners. But this is obviously, there's no doubt this is brilliant news for Newcastle fans. I struggled, and I did look just to see if there was one awkward bugger out there who said this is not good for Newcastle. But clearly it's brilliant news. But how long, Kieran, do you think it will take for the money to sort of take effect? Because it's quite a long time for the next transfer window. Newcastle are struggling. So, do you think they'll be throwing money at the problem as early as January?
I think there will be spending in January, because the most important thing is not not the next window, but the one after.
Yeah.
Newcastle will want to be in a position to offer players something which is attractive. Now, we all know that money is attractive, but it's not everything. If Newcastle were in the Championship, then how do you attract a high caliber player by saying we can offer you, Luton on a Tuesday night, when the alternative is playing in the Champions League on a Tuesday night with another club? So that does make it more of a challenge. Again, money can make some of these issues go away, but there's still financial fair play to take into consideration. I think in terms of what the owners can do, and we don't know how much money they've got to spend on this, because ultimately it is an investment project, and people look for a return on their investment. Now, it could be that return on investment is the same as we've seen in respect of Roman Abramovich and Sheikh Mansour, and the return is not measured financially, but we still have financial fair play to have to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing you got to offer for players, I mean, it's a beautiful part of the world, an absolutely beautiful part of the world with everything you would hope for that footballers want, nightclubs, restaurants, so on and so forth. It's good news, hopefully, as well for the city itself, because we saw in the part of Manchester that Man City's based in, it's had a real uplift, hasn't it, economically, since they were taken over.
Yeah. I lived in Manchester for 40 years, and without being rude, East Manchester was an area of social deprivation, and there has been an investment. There will be the opportunity for growth in terms of jobs, because the new owners will be looking to expand facilities. There's been chronic underinvestment in infrastructure. I showed the numbers, and I think that Newcastle's was about $6 million over the last decade. The next lowest in the Premier League was $25 million, and that was for Norwich, who spent 7 of those years outside of the Premier League. Yeah. So there is the opportunity, I think, for not just employment within the football club itself, but in the surrounding areas. Certainly, the last time I went to Newcastle, I love the city. A Saturday night in the big market in Newcastle, you've got to do it. You might not remember it, but you've still got to do it. But what astounded me was just the resignation amongst the fans. They had just been browbeaten by the many years of Mike Ashley's involvement with the club, and the paradox here is he's actually left a club in a really good position to grow, because he has run it as a business. He's run it effectively as he would run one of his Sports Direct stores, i.e. spending kept to the very bare minimum to achieve certain objectives. And his objective was 17th in the Premier League, and anything else is a bonus. So that's where we are. There's huge opportunities. If you take a look at the commercial income of Newcastle United during the 14 years of Mike Ashley's ownership, that grew by 1% over 14 years, compared to 164% for the Premier League overall. So, and that's partly due to the fact that Mike Ashley was a toxic brand. People didn't want to be associated with sponsorship, because they knew that fans would vote with their feet and not engage with the products, because they didn't want it to be they didn't want to associate themselves with Mike Ashley. So I think in terms of merchandise sales, you'd expect to tick up. Certainly, people have already spoken about the potential for some form of naming rights. I think you have to be a little bit sensitive on this issue. It's still St James's Park to us all, ultimately. But also, you would imagine that if I was the commercial director of Newcastle United, I would be booking a few tickets to Riyadh to go and sign some commercial deals with partners there, because there's going to be a huge interest. And Saudi's a much bigger country than many other countries in the Middle East.
So you mentioned that 17th in the Premier League being the limit of Mike Ashley's ambition. Well, that's an indication that it's very good news for Newcastle, but it's bad news, Kieran, for us Palace fans, Brighton fans,
Yeah.
Burnley fans, Southampton fans, because at the very least, even if it takes 2 or 3 seasons for Newcastle to get into the Champions League, you can't see them being one of the clubs that we would try to finish above in the Premier League. So another club has been taken out of our mini league of 8, 9 at the bottom, which is not good news for us, is it?
Yes, yeah, and there has been talk in the media about an emergency meeting of the Premier League owners, Premier League chief executives, taking place in the next few days. And apparently, this is all due to them being concerned that there might be damage to the Premier League brand through association with Saudi Arabia. Remember, six of these clubs are all for ripping up English football as we know it in Project Big Picture, and also ripping up European football as we know it in the form of the European Franchise League. They were also more than happy that they most of them want to scrap the Carabao Cup. They want the FA Cup to be moved to a midweek competition. We've got the 39th game. We've got relationships with Russia, Thailand, China, USA, and also we've got owners who are involved in industries that aren't necessarily squeaky clean themselves. Yeah. So I think to try to take some moral and ethical lens to this transaction and to say that this is unique is unreasonable. If we're going to apply some sort of moral or ethical standpoint to the owners and directors tests, then it's got to apply to all owners and all regimes that are involved in football. It is uncomfortable. What has happened in Saudi Arabia in terms of if you're gay, it's not going to be good. There's the issue with the journalist who was killed, and there's a proxy war taking place in Yemen. But how many times have you sat in a pub? And let's face it, we've been going to football a long, long time. How many discussions have we had in pubs over proxy wars taking place in Yemen and the human rights? Football isn't directly attached to that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not. It's a bigger issue than that. But as you say, Newcastle aren't the only club that you could point the finger at. But from a fan's point of view, to end this conversation, I mean, my reaction was, bugger, really? I wouldn't mind a bit of that. But you can't begrudge Newcastle fans their excitement. Essentially, it's like you can't just pull up the drawbridge and say, right, okay, we're not letting a club that we finish above have money. That's not fair. It's not right. You just have to go, right, we'll have to find different ways to compete. And in the meantime, good luck to Newcastle fans. My only fear is I could. Well, it's not a fear; it's a prediction. I can guarantee that in 5 years or 10 years' time, there will be Newcastle fans yearning for the good old days of Mike Ashley, because they'll say they've been priced out of the club. It's not as much fun as it used to be. But in the meantime, I genuinely hope that Newcastle fans enjoy the ride, and I'm quite intrigued to see what happens myself, actually. And and if Man United's nose is a bit out of joint, if Liverpool's nose is out of joint, if City's nose is out of joint, Chelsea, that doesn't bother me, to be perfectly honest. No. It really doesn't bother me. So let's get into questions, Kieran. We've got a lot of them. We'll see how many we can get through today. As usual, they're an interesting and varied bunch. And the first one comes from Jordan Sumner. And this is an issue we have sort of talked about, but not really in detail. We talk a lot about Scottish football, Kieran, and rightly so, but Welsh football we haven't covered in as much forensic detail because we don't get asked about it that often. But Jordan's asked this question. It's around the Welsh teams currently playing in the lower leagues of English football, above all Wrexham and Chester, although Chester technically aren't a Welsh team. But would it be more beneficial from a financial perspective for these two clubs to play in the Welsh Premier League rather than in the National League North, respectively? They could potentially compete at the top of the Welsh League, and so qualification for European competition could be achieved with the subsequent revenue opportunities that come with it. And we know, Kieran, for the little experience we do have for Wales, and it is a hot potato. It's sometimes hard to do right for doing wrong because there are quite rightly, Welsh football fans are sensitive to these issues.
Yes, and also in relation to your comments about Chester. Chester and Wrexham don't like each other.
They really don't like each other, do they?
No, because isn't it the town clock at Chester has got. It's got 4 sides to it, but only 3 of them have actually got clocks on because the 4th one points towards Wrexham. That's how much they hate each other. That's proper bitterness. That's what we love about this country.
It's a sort of petty spite that I really admire.
But looking at the position and Jordan's question, I think he's absolutely right. If you are the Welsh champions, you get €260,000 from UEFA. And that allows you effectively, and if you then get into the Champions League first proper round of qualifiers, there's preliminary rounds, you get another €150,000. So that's far more money than you get in the National League. And also, to put it into context, you get €260,000 from UEFA. If you win the Carabao Cup, you get 200 grand.
Yeah,
from as prize money. So, admittedly, you also get you get to play in the Europa League and so on. If you compare that to the monies available in the National League and the National League North, it's far in excess. So that's why clubs such as the New Saints have done so well, and it's part of Oswestry and part of another town who I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. But he's absolutely right that there are financial benefits. And with the expansion of UEFA's competitions to now include the Europa or UEFA Conference League, there is a far greater chance of a Welsh club actually getting into the group stages of one of those competitions. And again, the money ramps up very, very quickly. So, normally I would say you have to counterbalance that. If you are in the National League, you then have the opportunity, of course, to get into the EFL and the financial rewards that brings, because the TV deal in the National League, even for a League Two club, we're talking 7 figures. But if you get into the group stages of this new Europa competition, that's very beneficial as well. So it's an interesting conundrum for Welsh clubs. It's heads or tails. There's no definitive right approach, but you can understand why the New Saints have taken the approach that they have.
Yeah, interesting, Kieran, as well. It's not that long ago that Newport, or the Phoenix club that arose out of Newport County, found, I think a lack of cooperation would be the simplest way of putting it from the Welsh authorities, because when they were trying to get it back to their old ground and then trying to get a new ground, because they chose to try their luck in the English pyramid, because they thought there are better potential benefits for being in the English pyramid, and the Welsh authorities said, well, in that case, you can find a ground in England, essentially. So for 2 or 3 years, they were playing all over the place. So, as you say, it is swings and roundabouts, but there is merit to both options, isn't there?
Yes, and also Rodney Parade is, what a name for a.
It's great, isn't it?
We've got fantastic names from our subscribers today. That in terms of the questions, we've got some absolute corkers.
Do you know what? I was just desperately looking through the list of questions to see if I'd missed one from Rodney Parade. That's why you were saying it. And the next question is from Rodney Parade. Our next question is actually from Darren Shepherd. Excuse me if I sound a bit nasal today, by the way. It's not the sarcoid, it's the intermittently getting rained on and then burned in yesterday's typical October weather. Darren Shepherd says, in light of Kevin De Bruyne's choice to not use a standard agent in his last contract negotiation and go instead with a data collection agency who showed the ROI and true worth of contract investment, do you see this becoming more of a thing and more players changing to this tactic to get better deals? Also, could you see data collection and analysis become more common for other footballing decisions?
Well, yes, actually, to answer Darren's second question first, Manchester United on Friday announced the appointment of Dominic Jordan as a data science director. So clubs are taking it very seriously indeed. Manchester City have got somebody with a PhD in astrophysics in charge of their data analytics. And this also ties into the chat we had with Anthony Kaminskas on Wednesday in terms of being able to understand numbers and data is absolutely critical in the betting industry. Well, therefore, it should also be absolutely critical in the football industry. We've seen how Moneyball has worked in other sports, and that application is now being taken more seriously within some football clubs, not all. There's still some that believe sort of old school. I'll turn up with a flat cap and watch a player, and can he do it on a Tuesday night in Barnsley mentality? But I think clubs are starting to utilise the numbers to a far greater degree. So in terms of will players use this, I think they will. They'll either directly use the data agencies themselves. And perhaps go into negotiations with a lawyer, to make sure that they understand and they go through the small print. Or what you will find is that the large agencies themselves will start to have data analytics as part of their team, because they will know that if they fail to do that, they'll be seen as being behind the curve and they risk losing their clients. So I think this is going to come directly or indirectly, not only into player negotiations, but other aspects of the game as well.
Can I just check, Kieran, first of all, on behalf of Manchester United fans and on behalf of several baffled Crystal Palace fans who may be listening, is that the Dominic Jordan, as in Simon Jordan's brother, Dominic?
I don't think so. I think he's
okay. Right.
I think I didn't read it, and also I think he's quite. I think Simon's a bit younger than us, but he's not a huge amount younger than us. I think this Dominic Jordan might be a few years younger. Still.
Okay, I'm just asking for a friend, Kieran, because if it is Simon Jordan's brother, Dominic, he most definitely does not have a PhD in astrophysics.
Right. Okay. Right. Well, if it's wrong, Simon Jordan phones me up quite often. So
I've just discovered that fact, Kieran, through producer Guy, because quite rightly he decided to keep that from me. It's just the idea of you and that man. I can't even say his name out loud, but I hope you enjoy many a phone call, Kieran. That's all I can say.
I don't speak many words.
Oh no! It's very much not a two-way conversation when you're in the company of that man. Also, don't show him photographs of the Baroness. Our next question comes from Brett Peckham, and certainly not if he's with Alan Pardew. Our next question comes from producer Guy. I'd probably take that out, wouldn't
he? No.
Brett Peckham, which is a great name. We've had Rodney Parade, and now we've got Brett Peckham, so that's
yes.
good. And only fools and horses field down today. With all the American investment companies who are buying into English clubs because they're cheaper than US teams, would it not be better for them to buy, say, a League One club and get it promoted into the Championship and then the Premier League and sell it for a profit, rather than buying a middle, lower club in the Premier League and battling relegation, throwing money at it to keep it in the league? Or does the money you have to put into a club just to get through the Championship just make it not feasible?
Well, I think to a certain extent, Brett's answered his own question in the sense that if we take a look at the Championship in 2019, so pre-COVID, the average losses for clubs in the Championship were £470,000 a week. So if you buy a club on the cheap in League One, first of all, you've got to get promoted. And League One's not a walk in the park. You've got Sunderland, Ipswich, Pompey. You've got Charlton. You've got Wigan won the FA Cup less than a decade ago. So it's a tough division to get out. And I think Plymouth, who we've always said, Plymouth Argyle are this club who we think would be the 51st club to get into the Premier League in terms of their size and potential. I think it's not easy to get out of League One, so that's going to take a year or two. And remember, if you are an investor, you're looking for an exit route the day you buy into a business. So you've got one more year to have to deal with as a bare minimum. Then in the Championship, you're up against 6 to 8 clubs who are in receipt of parachute payments. And I know we've done parachute payments to death. they do give you an advantage. There's no doubt about that. I mean, it was never there. That wasn't what they were created for, but it does allow clubs to have a competitive advantage, a small one. So that's going to be more of a challenge. And then when you get into the Premier League, then yes, you could potentially sell at a profit. But in going from League One to getting to the Premier League, you'd have to say, if I buy a club in the League One for, let's say, in the region of 15 to 20 million. If it takes me 3 years to get to the Premier League, it's probably going to cost me another 50 or 60 million to get out. Then you've got the costs of buying players in the Premier League and establishing the club in the Premier League, and then you've got to go and find somebody to buy it off you. So it can be done, but there's a huge lot of pitfalls. We don't want to mention a certain club in the Championship who has lost an absolute fortune, is currently in administration, but they tried to buy their way out of the Championship, and it doesn't work. So what happens if you are this investor? You put in tens and tens of millions, and you're left with a club that's 14th in the Championship after 5 years. It's cost you an absolute fortune. So the advantage of being in the Premier League to begin with is at least you've got those guaranteed revenues and at least 2 years worth of parachute payments as well, should the worst happen in your first year of ownership.
Yeah, I panicked a little bit when you mentioned Plymouth Argyle then, because I thought you might be about to use the word sleeping giant, and then we'd have to have a massive argument, because it's one of the phrases we promised we'd try never to use on this podcast.
Yes, I
know. Our next question comes from Rob Platts. And Rob, I'm going to apologise to you in advance here, because I will ask Kieran the question, and I'll ask Kieran for as short an answer as possible, because I think this is a subject that needs exploring properly. It really does. And I think it needs us to get hold of somebody who knows much more about these things than I do, and possibly somebody from Forest Green Rovers, which is a hint as to what the question's about. It's a very good question. It's a very important question. It's a very topical question. So yes, Rob, I will ask it, but we will look to explore this in much more detail in the next 2 or 3 weeks, if that's okay. Rob says, research shows that 23 of the 92 Football League grounds in England could expect full or partial flooding all year round by the year 2050 as a result of rising sea levels caused by climate change, which is a frightening figure. 4 Premier League clubs have so far signed up to the United Nations Sport for Climate Action framework: Spurs, Liverpool, Southampton and Arsenal. And I hope many fans will be asking for their clubs to sign up soon. I know clubs can make some small changes easily and at zero cost. For example, switching to a renewable powered electricity supplier and putting more veggie and vegan options on the menu for fans and staff. But they can't all turn into Forest Green Rovers overnight. Do you know how much it would roughly cost a Premier League football club to make some more important initial steps towards sustainability? And Rob gives us some examples. So stopping all domestic air travel, converting to electric team buses, installing solar panels on the stadium and training ground, collecting rainwater for pitch irrigation, conducting a sustainability audit to establish their total carbon footprint, as Wolfsburg FC, I beg your pardon, do every 2 years. Now, I know Sky Sports had their totally carbon-free match, didn't they? Their first one 2 weeks ago, I believe. But this is an issue, Kieran, that this is one issue that football is dragging its feet on all sorts of issues, important issues, as we know, Kieran, but eventually they will have to take their part in this, won't they?
Yeah, in terms of Rob's question, I think the cost will be close to zero, because if you abandon using flights to go to matches and you use an alternative transport, it will be cheaper.
Yeah.
So you can go by coach, or I've seen clubs go by train.
Yeah.
And you can just book out a whole carriage for yourself, and we know a story connected to that, don't we? But we're not going to expand on that for the listeners. We'll keep that for the live shows.
Yeah. Well, although I should point out, Kieran, as a lawyer pointed out to me recently, that it's still slander, even if you're just saying it in a live situation. If more than 3 people hear it, so
that's not with our audience. I think that'll be a problem. They'll be walking out after 5 minutes. So I think clubs are looking towards this, and also, as you know, I do read every set of accounts from cover to cover, and
Yeah.
some of them are now starting to have environmental audits, and they are quoting their consumption of electricity. It's in their interests to do this because, as Rob says, if a quarter of the clubs in English
Yeah.
football are going to be
Yeah.
underwater in 30 years, well, they need to start acting now. So I think the financial cost will not be huge. And I know some fans of some clubs will say, well, what's the point of doing it if nobody else does it? Well, if everybody takes that attitude, then we're up in our neck in the doo-doo. It's on an individual basis, we can start to make a difference.
Yeah.
And I think people will actually start to take this into serious consideration because we're going through an energy crisis this winter in terms of pricing, and all of a sudden you start to realise that there are benefits in taking more care. Having said that, again, we go back to some of these clubs that have signed up to the UN commitment. Super League wasn't going to help particularly because that involved more games taking place in Europe and more travel. The 39th games taking place in Doha or Riyadh or Indonesia. Well, that wasn't going to help either. So clubs have got to do more than lip service, and I think they do need to take into consideration as part of their strategy, as part of their decision-making process, the impact of those decisions, not only financially, which, as we know, is a huge driver in football, but also, I've got 2 granddaughters now. I want them to grow up in a nice world, or in a world where they're not underwater.
Yeah. I'd like to think, Kieran, you're right. There will be some fans saying, "Oh, why are we doing this?" But I like to think that most of them would look at these small improvements around the ground and say, "Oh, that's a good idea." I like to think that Palace fans, if they were told that rainwater was being used for pitch irrigation, they go, "Great, that's a good idea."
I can't see any downside.
Yeah, because we've all seen, there's barely a season passes by without us chuckling at a pundit being soaked because of the amount of water. The sprinklers are on the pitch. Huge amounts of water used to, and it's not just in the ground; it's training as well. So, Rob, thank you for that question. As I say, this is something we will explore in more detail in the next couple of weeks, and I think it's something we want to take on because, like as Kieran says, we've made a mess. I know this sounds like a terrible 70s hippie thing to say, but we really have made a mess of this place, haven't we?
Yeah.
And so I get so cross with people like Piers Morgan, middle-aged, wasp-faced men, gammon, having to go at people like Greta Thunberg for having the audacity to be young and concerned for the future of the planet. We need to be not like that.
And also, somebody who you might think would be in that particular camp. I've just been watching Clarkson's Farm on Netflix. It is. I have learned more about farming, and I'm not interested in cars, and I can find Jeremy Clarkson a bit tedious at times. This has opened my eyes, but also he has been absolutely brilliant for promoting the huge importance of looking after this green and pleasant land. And if anybody hasn't watched it and thinks, well, I think Jeremy Clarkson's a bit of an arse, I'd recommend it because your opinion will change. And yes, he plays to the cameras to a certain extent, but it's absolutely amazing stuff.
Am I talking to the right Kieran Maguire? You're on the phone to Simon Jordan. You're praising Jeremy Clarkson. You'll be on the beach at Dover with a megaphone in a minute.
Well, I was on GB News this week.
Were you?
Yeah.
What, hosting your own show?
No. And I thought they asked me, and I thought, well, if I appear on Al Jazeera.
No,
if I appear on CNBC, which is China's China, I appear on RT Today, Russia. Then surely I cannot take. I cannot be sneery about it. I was wearing Union Jack underpants for the interview, just to sort of feel I was buying into the station. But yeah, it was different. The only media outlet I won't talk to is the Sun, because I work in Liverpool, and
of course,
out of respect for the people that I work with, I don't think it's appropriate. But other than that.
Well, you'll probably be pleased to know that I turned down quite a lot of money to write an article in the Sun recently. So,
good man.
It hurt a little bit, Kieran, but it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Let's get on with some questions. Mark Strong says that in a recent pod, you mentioned the Man City owners have acquired several different clubs around the world, and Man United might be looking to do the same. Does this mean that owners with multiple clubs can move money from one club that might be doing very well and making wads of cash to another club that isn't doing so well to offset financial fair play?
Can they do this? Yes, they can. Am I going to accuse any clubs of doing this? Certainly not. But but let's just take a random example. Mark mentioned Manchester City. So Manchester City are part of the City Football Group. Aaron Moy was playing for Melbourne City, really good-looking player when he, a few years ago, and he moved to Manchester City. I think it was on a free transfer.
Yeah.
And you go, well, that seems quite a good deal for Manchester City. And then they loaned him and sold him to Huddersfield Town for £10 million. That £10 million of profit, around £9 or £10 million, whatever it was, that, of course, ended up in the books of Manchester City. Perfectly legitimate, I hasten to add. But also it contributed towards financial fair play. Here in England, there isn't a similar cost control taking place in Australia. So yes, it does allow you to shift profits from one part of the business to another. And this happens, by the way, in all institutions. We see Facebook and Google being accused of it, with the stories of how much tax Facebook pays here in the UK, and then that gets people angry. And this is actually known as transfer pricing from a taxation perspective. You could do the same from other types of revenues. Let's say that you've got a Premier League club and it plays a pre-season friendly against one of the other clubs owned by the group, and for the privilege of playing in either the US or Indonesia or Belgium, you of course you're entitled to charge a fee. So it could be that the Premier League club charges £5 million. Nothing wrong with it.
No.
Yeah. All counts towards financial fair play. Pure coincidence.
Yeah. You do have a certain way of saying some things, Kieran, that makes it quite clear what you actually mean. Frank Chart asks our next question. Frank says, we often hear about the salary of managers in the Premier League and how much it might cost to dispense with their services. I was discussing Liverpool assistant manager Pep Linders with my son-in-law recently, as Pep's son attends the same school as my granddaughter. Always like a bit of context in a question, Frank. Thank you very much. Could have gone straight to it, but no, you gave us that extra bit of detail. I like that. My son-in-law and I speculated what Pep's salary might be in comparison to Jurgen Klopp. Obviously, there'll be no rule of thumb on this, but in ballpark figures, what, in percentage terms of a main man's salary, might a good number two expect?
You can't beat a good number two, I always say.
Especially on Boxing Day. Eh? It's the best one of the year, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah, take a good book with you.
Or take our book with you if you want.
Yes. We've never been nominated for a BAFTA, have we, Kevin?
Not yet. Sure. I keep saying it's surely only a matter of time, and then we get distracted by toilet humour. Literally toilet humour in this case.
Yes. Again, I don't have any knowledge of individual pay packets, but I was talking to somebody recently who advised me that there was an assistant manager in the Championship on £400,000 a year. Wow. So, and of course, because he's in a management role, we quote his pay in a salary per year as opposed to a footballer who's a working class oik. We have to go and quote it in weeks. Yeah. I would say it's normally in the region of perhaps 10 to 20% of what the manager would be on. Right. We've got managers who are on 6 to 10 million. I would expect a very small fraction of that to go to the assistant team. Clubs are actually very keen to keep costs low, and assistant managers are not they're not the focal point. They're not the star name. If they are a star name, they tend to go off to be managers themselves, as we saw with Mikel Arteta.
Yeah. We still have a few questions to go, Kieran. I'm not entirely sure we'll get through all of them, but it means that we'll have a couple of really interesting ones to start next week. This next question from Ian Beresford, it's one of those questions that even I, with my lack of financial acumen, think there should be a very simple answer to it. And it's so simple, I almost don't understand the question. And that's how bad I am at finances. This simple question is very difficult to understand. Now, Ian Beresford said, is there a logic to players being classed as intangible assets in accounts when they are clearly physical assets? I mean, to my mind, clearly, they are. You couldn't be more tangible than a human being, so why are they classed as intangible assets?
Right. For those people unfamiliar with this term, intangible, an intangible is defined as being an asset without physical substance. So it's something such as a license, a patent right, goodwill, a brand, and so on. When you sign a footballer, first of all, it's a misnomer. You are not signing a footballer. You are giving the footballer's previous employer compensation for their rights, their rights of employment. So what happens is, when Manchester United went out and signed Paul Pogba, he was contractually obliged to Juventus Football Club for the next 2 to 3 years. So what Manchester United did, they went and said, we are going to give you a compensation fee for giving up your rights to exclusivity. And that's the big issue. So you are actually the intangible asset that you are buying is his registration certificate. And under football rules, and this applies to Sunday League football as well. If you're registered with Club X, you cannot play for another Sunday League club unless, of course, you play under a mate's name. As we both know from prior experience. And then somebody goes, hold on, weren't you playing for Streatham Rovers last Sunday? Oh, no. It's a bloke. I'm often mixed up with him, but he looks like me. Okay. It's because you're not allowed to transfer registrations and play for two clubs at once. You get and therefore it's the exclusivity of registration, and you are compensating somebody else for that. So it's that right that you are buying. You are not buying the footballer themselves, because I often speak to friends in the States with regards to this, not celebrities, by the way. And could they get very twitchy about this concept of transfer fees because of the history of the United States? So isn't this a form of slavery? And it's not. You are not buying the football player. It is his registration certificate.
Have you told me that before, Kieran? Because that's really interesting. I did not know that. I mean, so either I've just learnt something, or I've realised that I've forgotten something that you've taught me already. But I think that will come as a surprise to a lot of people, to be perfectly honest. So Ian Beresford, thank you for that question. It's very illuminating. James Spring says there's been a lot of talk in the local press that his club, Notts County, may have to shut down its academy if they don't get promoted to the National League soon. Are there parachute payments for clubs relegated from the EFL? And does the EFL provide any funding for club academies?
In terms of EFL parachute payments, in your first year following relegation from the EFL, you get 100% of the League Two money, and in your second year, you get 50%. So yes, there are parachute payments. And they might sound quite high, but those are purely from the EFL's own TV deal. Remember, the EFL clubs get more money from the Premier League TV deal than they do from their own. So in what's referred to as solidarity payments. So yes, you do get money for 2 years following relegation. In terms of academies, I think there is some sort of central compensation scheme for clubs that run academies, but it's not great. And also, academies are set out as grades, and you've got grades 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the amount of compensation you get for a grade 1 academy is far higher, but also the running costs are very high as well.
Yeah.
So I can understand Notts County be under an awful lot of cost pressure since being relegated, and I'm old enough to remember Notts County in the top tier, and and also going to Wembley in the 1991 playoff final when we played them and they beat us 3-1. Neil Warnock was the manager. Tommy Johnson scored twice against us. I'm not still bitter. 30 years later, of course, and they ended up in the top tier of English football as a result.
I remember. I still thank them for it.
Yes.
Our next question, that sounds like I'm thanking Neil Warnock, and I wouldn't like that on the record. Nobby Clark asked our next question. If it's the Nobby Clark Palace fan that I know, then hello, Nobby. But Nobby is a very common nickname for people who are called Clark, or it was in the 1950s in black and white films anyway. So it may not be the Nobby Clark I know, but Nobby says, now that the Wigan ownership saga is thankfully resolved, I was just wondering whether there had been any developments in the Stanley Choi, Al Young shenanigans and suspected betting scam. If there was any truth in it, I'd hate for them to get away with it and would like to see Wigan compensated if possible. That does sound like the Nobby Clark I know.
Yes. No, there has been no further progress. There's a lot of conspiracy theories here, and I know Rick Parry of the EFL. He was secretly filmed by a fans suggesting that there had been a bet in the Philippines for Wigan Athletic to be relegated, and that then went out on social media, which was perhaps a bit harsh. We have our friends in Asia who have put forward alternative theories to that, involving Stanley Choi and Al Young with regards to Stanley Choi's company was seeking approval to open a gambling establishment in the Philippines, and owning Wigan at the same time could have been a bit of a conflict of interest. Was there some form of relationship between the two, because they are both well-known gamblers? But as the administrators of Wigan Athletic, when they were not designing a statue of themselves, the great work that they'd done, they did have a Zoom conversation with Al Young, and by all accounts, very little progress was made. And I think since then, we've just seen big broom and a lot of carpet, and everybody's trying to forget that this ever took place.
That's not the answer that Nobby was hoping for, unfortunately, and I think most of us would agree. Jude McCarthy, we are going to get through all our questions today, Kieran. We've done very well. Congratulations. Jude McCarthy says, as a way of paying less tax, instead of a player signing a contract with a club, would it be possible, /legal, for him to set up an offshore company and for that company to have a contract with the club for the supply of the player's services, and for the player to then take his money out of the company in salary /dividends so as to minimise tax paid? So this is quite an interesting second question to the intangible asset one, isn't it?
Yes. So in terms of Jude's question, and I'm not a tax accountant. I did used to teach tax back in the day, and tax is, of course, for nearly all accountants, their favourite three-letter word ending in X. And in fact, for most of them, their only three-letter word ending in X, given their personalities.
Oh my Lord. How many is that an accountant's favourite joke?
It's my account. Yeah, I've been using that one for 40 years teaching.
No, but trust me, Bobby Numbers, he forgets. I might need a new accountant. I would never get a new accountant, Bobby. But Bobby Numbers seems to forget that. I've heard that joke every time I turn up. Bobby, I'm a comedian. I don't forget jokes. I forget to pay tax. I do forget to put money away for my tax. I agree. I may have accidentally spent my VAT money. I agree, but I don't forget jokes.
But back to Jude's position. A football player could have an agreement in his contract with the football club for a proportion of earnings to be classified as image rights, and those image rights to be paid to a separate company, which could be located overseas. So that, and we've had this conversation before. Now, HMRC don't like football clubs trying to do things like that, and they don't like people trying to take the mickey. So under what's known as IR35 rules, which are hitting huge numbers of people who are self-employed or consider themselves to be self-employed, quite often you will then find yourself down to be an employee of a particular organisation. And on the back of that, you will have PAYE deducted. So, to have all of the players' earnings paid via an offshore company, that would not work. But to have a proportion, and at present, HMRC tend to say, well, we'd normally be okay for 20% if you are a star name. But if you are Morecambe's left back, the chances are, who's going to be paying you for your image rights? 100% we're going to classify your remuneration as earned, and therefore has to be dealt with under the PAYE system. So there is scope for some tax planning here, but it cannot be abused. There are a few clubs. If you go into the small print of football club accounts, I don't recommend this, by the way. If you go into the small print, you will actually see them say that they are under present investigation by the tax authorities.
Yeah, this is something HMRC are really cracking down on in my industry.
I was going to suggest, I thought as much.
This notion of people making themselves a limited company and hiring the services to the TV company, rather than being an employee of the BBC, or is certainly one that HMRC have woken up to in the past couple of years. Our final question comes from Tom Holliday, Kieran. For anyone of our generation, this is going to be a question that they find interesting. As Tom says, I know you've had a lot of questions about match day programmes recently and the income they might generate. However, my club, Leeds, and most others, I assume, have a strong fanzine scene. Would it be in the club's interest to stop producing official programmes and invest instead in producing, advertising and distributing the seemingly more popular fan-produced magazines? Now, this is a very pertinent question for me, Kieran, because the price of football, that's us. 5-year plan, 5-year plan, the Palace podcast I do, also does a two a year printed fanzine, which is brilliant. It's a really, really strong fanzine. Before the Tottenham game, it sold out in about half an hour, possibly because there were huge queues trying to get in because the turnstiles weren't working. But they are still immensely, and it's a really good product. I mean, the only thing it doesn't provide is team news and profiles of the other team on that particular day. But that's easy enough to get from the internet. But I think the answer to Tom's question is probably the clubs wouldn't be interested in doing it. But I think it's a good question.
Yeah, he's absolutely right. There has been a decline in sales of match day programmes, and my understanding is that it's pretty marginal at many clubs. And in fact, some clubs have now moved to a digital-only version. And if you're a season ticket holder, that's part of what you get for attending a match. Certainly, my mate Uncle Ian, who is a guru of matchday programs and has got them going for going back decades and decades, he says, his fear is that it is going to die out. It's a bit like, remember the bloke that used to walk around at half time with the scores of other matches, and you would go and shout at him. Some things it's part of that era. And is it actually appropriate for the digital age to have a match day program? In terms of fanzines, I love fanzine culture. I think my club would not exist had it not been for the way that we used to rally. The fanzine was the way to communicate. Weird one that was without doubt the saviour of the club, and the two guys that ran it, they got sued by the club, and they lost a fortune for. Sometimes fanzines can go too far, which then brings us into the issue. If it is a fanzine, the one thing that you want is editorial independence. And the one thing that the club will not give you is editorial independence. Because if you're saying the manager's crap, the left back shite, we saw such and such a player out last Saturday night in a nightclub following a 3-0 defeat, and he seemed to be enjoying himself. All of that type of stuff is going to get censored. One of the reasons I don't buy a match day program is because it is sanitized, and I think they are actually. A lot of them when you occasionally might go to a match and read one because you got a long journey back or something. They are actually pretty high quality publications, no doubt about that. But that everything has gone through the system, and one of the things that we love about fanzines, and also if you think about this podcast and your podcast 5-year plan, it's that you can take on the club and you can be a little bit angsty. And that would not happen if you became part of the official club machine. And also what would happen, of course, is that 2 or 3 people who used to write for the fanzine, they get hacked off and they go and set up their own fanzine in competition straight away.
Yeah, well, also fanzine culture. It was a 5-year plan that took on the Sussex Police after the notorious weapon planting incident.
Oh yeah, that was appalling.
Yes, but I don't think individual fans would have been able to do that. I used to have a page in the Palace programme, Kieran, for quite a few seasons.
Did you? Cool.
While we're in the Championship, every Saturday, you'd read it and you think, I don't think they've even checked this. Because they would just let everything through. It's just like I would literally be ranting about how shit we were. And they'd go, that's fine. As soon as we got in the Premier League, they found out, probably best not now. Now we've got grown-up fans watching it. I used to love reading the programme on the away trip. If you'd won and you're travelling back on a train, reading the programme from cover to cover of the other team is always brilliant. And, and I used to. One of the things I miss about football is the old blokes who would buy 2 programmes, one to write the team changes on and one to keep pristine at home for their collection. I used to like that.
Yeah.
But if you would like to make a small monthly contribution to our always free to air pod, then please go to patreon.com/price of football. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show on any aspect of football finance, big, small, in any part of the world, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com and I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Okay, once again, folks, thanks very much for everything. If you like us and you want to give us some good karma, go onto that big purple button on Apple and give us 5 stars and say something rude and cheeky. That's how we like it. Other than that, bye-bye.
That's what we should call ourselves, rude and cheeky. Bye, everybody.
The price of football. The price of football.